In Napoleon Hill's timeless classic, Think and Grow Rich, he defines a mastermind group as the coordination of knowledge and effort between two or more people for the attainment of a definite purpose. In this podcast, that coordination is created between you, me, and our amazing guests. Our definite purpose is achieving extraordinary results in your business and your life. I'm your host, Brad Mulvey. Welcome to the Millennial Mastermind Podcast. Welcome back to the Millennial Mastermind Podcast, where I have the honor of interviewing guests who will provide us with the tools, tactics, inspiration to take our business and our lives to the next level. Today, I am thrilled to introduce Chris Bailey. Chris is the author of The Productivity Project. He's also the creator of A Life of Productivity, where he posts a weekly column on all things productivity, shares resources, and it's just really a home for all things that are focus and productivity related. His newest book, Hyper Focus: How to Be More Productive in a World of Distraction, hit shelves August 28th and is available now for pre-order. So Chris, welcome to the show. Pumped to have you, man.
Thanks for having me, man. Yeah, it's good to be here.
So you were kind enough to share the manuscript for the book with me. I'm thrilled to dive into this stuff. I personally need it myself. I think that just what I've had the opportunity to read so far has already started to be reflected in my work. So I'm excited to share what you're working on and some of what you've learned and the research you've done with our audience.
Yeah, honestly, this is something that I struggle with also, and that's why I wrote the book. And I think this is something that a lot of quote-unquote experts, it's usually people that call themselves an expert on something in their bio and things like that. But I think this is something that that a lot of people aren't open enough about, and it's that an expert struggles at whatever they're providing advice about. That's why they're exploring that advice in the first place. And anybody that doesn't, I think, is frankly bullshitting you a little bit. But I found that as one of these quote unquote experts, after writing the Productivity Project, I was distracted more often than I had been in years. And I thought, like, if this is a situation that I face, I have more work to do. I have less time to do it in. I have more things that I want to do, but I've never been so busy while accomplishing so little. I've never been more distracted. Maybe this is something that's worth exploring because, I have this rule for myself where whenever I provide a piece of advice to my audience and I don't take it myself, then that's a sign that I should more deeply explore that area because maybe there's something more counterintuitive happening that might work a bit better. And that's what I found with this book is that our attention isn't as it seems on the surface.
That's fascinating. I love that rule, and I think that I need to implement something similar. So going back in time a little bit, can you just talk a little bit where you were in your life when you started to get interested in some of this stuff and what led to you really diving deep into it and going down the path of becoming, like you said, a quote unquote expert who really was just trying to figure a lot of this stuff out for yourself and doing a ton of research and experimentation along the way?
This is a weird part about accumulating more knowledge and expertise about a topic is at the same time you accumulate more information about that topic. I would think that I know more about productivity than most people walking around. But at the same time that you accumulate knowledge, you accumulate a greater number of questions about that same topic. And so I think when you think you're an expert, that's a sign that you're becoming too ensconced in what you believe to be true. But this is honestly, it's something that I've been researching with and experimenting with for over the last decade or so. It's this background productivity, I think, is the backdrop against which we live our lives, because I don't define productivity as doing more, faster. I think it's about doing the right things and doing those things deliberately and with intention behind what we're doing. But more than that, it's about accomplishing what we set out to do. So if we have, a perfectly relaxing day on the beach and we have a few glasses of wine and we, Zencaster just refreshed. see, we deal with a lot of distractions, even when we're trying to hyper focus on recording a podcast. And so, this is the state in which we live and the state in which we work. And it's been this background curiosity up until the point where a few years back I graduated from university, and I received a few full-time job offers. But I thought, if there's ever a time that I should experiment with something that I'm deeply curious about and follow what I'm interested in, it's now. And so I declined the job offers. I dove deep into experimenting with and researching productivity for a year, using that year as a sandbox in which to run experiments on myself, using myself as a guinea pig, while interviewing the greats. And I've been lucky that since that project, it quickly became the book that's called The Productivity Project. Since that time, I've been lucky that I can continue to research and explore this. It's kind of a weird curiosity. Like, some people have normal curiosities, like, I don't know, sports and stuff, but this has always been what I've been a nerd about.
Well, hey, it is a productive curiosity in every sense of it.
If you're gonna have like a curiosity, it might as well help you out in other areas of your life, right?
100%. And no, I kind of love your journey of how you started exploring this and the acceptance that, you know what, I don't know about this. Let's figure it out. I'm really excited to dive into some of these topics, and just pro job on rolling right through the Zencaster refresh. Love it. So one area I kind of want to start with and to dive into is multitasking, because this is an area we hear so much about. Some people are of camp, there's no such thing as multitasking. You could really only work on one thing at a time. Some people are multitasking experts according to their resumes. So I want to get your take on, what have you learned from the research? What is your experience told you about this topic?
Yeah, I think this is something you'll quickly find in asking these questions with the interview, is that I always side on the side of the research. If the research says something, then that's what I say too. And so what I think multitasking is an oddly understood phenomenon. And this is one of those topics where I went into writing this book. Over the course of writing this book, I poured over hundreds of studies, reading them front to back. I think a lot of people say they read a study front to back, but people don't really understand how boring that can be. But, luckily it's driven by a kind of self-flagellating curiosity about this topic. But I think multitasking is one of these things that I thought I understood, but that I didn't really in practice. And I think the thing we don't get about multitasking is that we can do it, but there is a difference between multitasking and task switching, especially rapid task switching. We can't actively focus on more than one thing at one time, especially when something requires a deep level of focus, because our attention is so limited. We can only hold about 4 unique pieces of information in our mind at once. And this is why we can't carry on 2 conversations at one time. This is why we can't read 2 books at the same time. This is why our capacity to be productive is so limited. And because of this, we got to respect our attention. That should be the name of the book, Respect Your Attention. But it's actually a bad name now that I think about it extemporaneously. But we can multitask, but only with habits. And this is something that, a habit, once we initiate doing a habit, our brain kind of carries on with the rest of the habit sequence on autopilot mode, so we don't really have to think about it. It's only when we have to intervene with the habit, when we're driving our usual route to work or school, and then we hit a detour on that road. That's when we have to modify our behavior and intervene and give some attention toward that habit. But we can't actively focus on more than one thing at one time. And so this is something that surprised me, is that when people refer to multitasking, they're often not referring to paying attention to more than one thing at one time. What they're referring to is this idea of rapidly switching between tasks, giving your full attention to your phone, then your full attention to an Excel document you're in the middle of, then giving your full attention to a report that you're writing. But we think we're giving our full attention to something, and that there's kind of a good value in multitasking because we have a lot of demands on our attention, but we can't do it cleanly. And this is why we falter when we rapidly switch between things, is that when we switch from doing one thing to doing a second thing, there is a certain amount of residue that exists within our attentional space. And so, in other words, when we're surfing Instagram and then we go to checking email, a part of our attention is still on Instagram, and so we can't cleanly focus on email right after. And when we do this, when we switch between things rapidly, tasks have been shown to take 50% longer as opposed to when we focus on one thing from start through to completion. So, a couple takeaways that I discovered there. We can multitask, but only with habits, because we can do them automatically. Tasks take about 50% longer compared to when we focus on one thing, and it's because of this residue that exists within our attention. And so by respecting the attention and being a good custodian of our attention, we can make sure we manage it more cleanly, I think.
So what's your recommendation then for individuals who, they make a regular occurrence out of this rapid task switching, where they're on email, they're working on a project, but they have email up on a second screen, and anytime something pops up, they just jump over and respond to that real quick. And when I say they, I really mean me, because I am totally guilty of this. And I know that it has to be a killer of my productivity, but I'm just curious kind of what your recommendations are to limit or eliminate that.
Well, I think a good place to start is in the fact that another thing that surprised, I was so hard on myself when I began writing this book, but one of the central theses of the theses of the book is that being distracted and working in this state of really multitasking or rapid task switching is a process by which we continually interrupt ourselves in that way. But something that was clear to me the more I explored the research was that this isn't really our fault, because our attention is wired for distraction. And this, I think, if people take one thing away from this interview, it's that this is the way our brain is wired. In fact, our attention is wired to pay attention to anything that has one of three characteristics by default. We're wired to pay attention to anything that is first pleasurable, and then threatening, and then novel. And so you look at the devices around you that you welcome into your attention, and the apps that you have open, email being a good example of this, social media being a good example of this, our smartphone being a good example of this, the news websites we switch to as we're working being a good example of this. There's nothing more pleasurable or threatening or novel than our smartphone, then a news website, then email. And that's why we compromise our productivity and take longer to do everything by not hyper-focusing on just one thing. In fact, on the novelty point, there's kind of a novelty bias that is embedded within our brain's prefrontal cortex, the logical center of our brain, where it releases dopamine, the pleasure chemical, every time we focus on something that is new and novel. And so we wake up and then we get our phone because that's what woke us up. And then we see that somebody tagged us in a Facebook picture and we tend to that. Then we bounce to a news app and we tend to that. And so we get a hit of dopamine. And before we know it, we've been laying down in bed for 25 minutes and not accomplished a single thing. But I think this is the key takeaway. It's that it's not our fault. And instead of giving advice, as a lot of, again, quote unquote, experts do, I want to, give the listeners, whomever may be listening to this, a challenge, and is to give yourself some advice, because the truth is, when it comes to our focus, we have more than enough data at our disposal. And I think if you think back to when you were last most productive and focused and in the zone and in that hyper-focused state where you look up at the clock and 20 minutes have gone by when you think it's been 2 minutes, look back on how many things you were switching between, whether your phone was nearby or maybe you were on a deadline and you had no choice but to focus on your phone. How many distractions did you really tend to that were pleasurable, threatening, or novel? And I think this is, so I guess it's it's a two-pronged answer to the question. It's not your fault that you're distracted because it's the way our attention is wired. Instead of hyper-focusing on a fire that we were building, we paid attention to the novel threat that was the saber-toothed tiger that was encroaching in whatever we happen to be doing in the moment. But B, it's worth reflecting back on when you were the most productive and the attentional state you were in at that time, because chances are you weren't focused on switching between 5 or 10 different things. You were probably focused on one important thing at a time.
Mm-hmm. It's not your fault. I just think of Good Will Hunting, Robin Williams, consoling Matt Damon. It's not your fault. It's not your fault.
It's not your fault, Brad.
So the title of the book is Hyperfocus.
That's something that's worth so just like a tangent on that point.
Yeah.
And this is something that I found came up repeatedly in writing this book, was that we're really hard on ourselves as we manage our attention. We get distracted and we say like, man, can't you effing pay attention to anything? Like what the hell is wrong with you? And our mind is wandering and we say, God damn, why can't I focus on anything today? Mm-hmm. But really, this self-kindness, it's a bit of a nebulous concept, I'll admit, but it's something that I don't think is mentioned enough in the research because, or in the stuff people are talking about. And it actually lets us focus deeper, the studies that I encountered found, because, we're not averse to noticing that our mind has wandered. We don't become averse to noticing that we've become distracted. Instead, we seek out these facts about our attention, and so we can get back on track quicker.
Yeah, that makes total sense, because if you give yourself some grace there, and that, as the title of your book alludes to, we live in a world of distraction and it's gonna happen, but just giving yourself the allowance to go ahead, catch yourself when you do get distracted and get back to the task at hand rather than beat yourself up. It's just a healthier way of looking at it and place from coming from.
A nicer way of working,
Mm-hmm.
and this is something, about half of the distractions we face are external, but about half of them are internal. In fact, it's a pretty even breakdown amongst those two. I think it's like 51% on one, 49% on the other. And so this is just the way our brain is wired. Random sampling studies have found that our mind is wandering on some level 47% of the day. So, and we notice that it's wandered about 5 times an hour. So taken together, these two facts, it wanders quite a bit without our permission. But, I think this is just more evidence that we should be kind to ourselves, because it's not the way our unique mind is wired. This is the way being human feels. Right. So I think I would double down on that point for sure.
So what role does our environment play in this space in terms of having a cluttered desk or a cluttered mind even? What
Yeah.
has the research pointed anything in terms of having a cleaner space helping with your productivity and
Yeah.
things like that? Because those are things that some of us may have heard of before, but I'm curious what your experience has been with that.
Yeah, the research on that is actually quite curious. If you want a team to be more creative, one of the best things that you can do is, instead of going to a clean conference room, go to a messy one, or to an environment where there's a lot of there's a messy play. So being surrounded by a messy environment actually aids us in creativity, but a clean environment aids us in productivity and focus. And so it's this fascinating idea, but I think this is just one piece of evidence that our environment matters a ton when it comes to our focus, because any potential object of attention in our external environment can potentially pull us away from whatever we intend to accomplish. And so, I argue in the book that it's worth becoming deliberate about what potential objects of attention we allow into our environment. So I'm just looking around my office here, and there's a meditation cushion to my right. There's a piano on my left. There's a big whiteboard on my left too. There's plants. There's but there's no smartphone. There's no tablet. There are very few things that would. There's my turtle, Edward, who's basking on her rock. You can't tell the gender of a turtle when you get them. So we took a shot at Edward, and it didn't quite work out. But the idea is that any one of these things, should they occupy my complete attention, first of all, they probably wouldn't, but if they did, I would notice and get back on track pretty quickly. And they're productive things to focus on too. And so my smartphone is, I just had to check because maybe it was at the table on the table behind me, but it's in another room right now. My tablet's in another room right now. The computer that I have that I'm chatting with you on, even though there's an occasional distraction from Zencastr whenever it hiccups, there's no notifications coming in. And the Freedom app that I use, which is a distractions blocker, is enabled because I want to tame anything that could serve as a more potentially attractive object of attention in the moment than what I truly want to be doing. And so, I think taming the things in our environment, this is the odd thing about our environments too. If you ask somebody where they're the most productive, few people will say the office. People will say the coffee shop down the street. They'll say, it's before the kids have woken up. It's in the wee hours of the morning on the kitchen table. Very few people say the office, and it's because we're not presented by our traditional cues, the conversations that remind us of projects that we're working on, the meeting rooms that we walk by that remind us of all the demands of our job, that we're the most productive in an environment that we can control and that is simple and that contains few distractions. And so I think these are lessons that we can really internalize when it comes to our productivity.
So I know another point that you talk about in some of your research and on your site is that one of the benefits of working productively is that you can work less hours and accomplish more. Does that also work inversely, where if you are working less hours, that you have more pressure to be more focused and more productive, and ultimately by working less hours, you end up just by the very nature of having less time allotted that you're more productive?
Yeah, and it's a simple causal effect and relationship between our time and attention in that way, where when we shrink how much time we allow ourselves to do something for, we force ourselves to dedicate more attention instead of more time to whatever we happen to be doing. And if you're writing a report, it's kind of a nice way of illustrating this, where instead of dedicating an afternoon to writing that report, you can set a timer for 35 minutes and focus on that for 35 minutes. And chances are you'll accomplish just as much on that report because you're so deeply focused on that one thing. And it speaks to this phenomenon that is called Parkinson's law, I believe, where, if you haven't heard of the law, chances are you've experienced the effects of it, where it's this rule where our work tends to expand to fit how much time we have available for its completion. And so if you have a light time at work, maybe you have 1 or 2 hours of really focused work to do. You might find that you spread that work over the course of the entire day while checking your email and filling the rest of the time with busyness because, we tend to look at how busy we are as a proxy for how productive we are because productivity is so difficult to measure when we do knowledge work for a living. And, you might find that you're pretty burnt out even though you didn't really do much over the course of the day. And it's because you had to regulate your attention so often. We really only expend mental energy when we regulate our attention in some way or another. And so, it's this fascinating phenomenon where you really discover how much work you have to do when you tame these distractions ahead of time. So some people, I coach some people in becoming more productive, mostly executives, and they find that they're able to accomplish an entire day's worth of work in 2 or 3 hours and have the rest of the day to either take off if they're an entrepreneur or to brainstorm and to ideate and to connect ideas and read books and mentor employees when they realize how much work they actually have to do. And so, and you see this effect in a lot of countries. I think Sweden is doing this, and I'm probably going to get the names of the countries wrong, but where they're shortening the work week and how many hours people have, especially over the summer, and they find that there's no consequential dip in productivity. And it's because it has the same effect as a deadline where you shrink how much time somebody has for something and they're just going to spend more attention instead.
Mm-hmm. That makes perfect sense for someone like me who is very deadline driven and, have always found myself cramming. So that does make a lot of sense.
It's because deadlines are such a novel threat. Mm-hmm. that we pay attention to them over. And so in order for us to pay attention to our work instead of, Twitter, our work has to be either more pleasurable, threatening, or novel than Twitter. And that's hard to do. And so if it's not, and we can't make it so, we have to tame distractions so that we can't even get to Twitter. And that eliminates that potential object of attention, which gives us no choice but to focus on what's important. Because, distractions is just anything that's more attractive to us in the moment. But deadlines, like you say, it's they're novel. They're a threat. And when they're a more novel threat than what we see as a distraction, or they're more pleasurable because we can see the rewards coming up around the corner, then we'll pay attention to those instead. But it really is this instinctual bias that's programmed in our mind that we got to get out in front of.
So you mentioned an interesting idea of limiting your ability to get to these distractions or eliminating it. I know that in the past I've experimented with things like website blockers to block Facebook or something during certain hours where I know that no good will come from that. Are there any other tools or are there any resources that you particularly recommend for helping to eliminate or limit the distractions that we have access to?
Oh, man. There are many. I think in addition to controlling your environment, which is something that we should all be doing, leaving your phone in another room if you can, same with your tablets. A few of my favorite apps, the one that I personally use is called Freedom. And once you enable Freedom, you have to actually restart your computer if you want to access the websites that you've blocked. And so it's not one of these things where, you're in Chrome and you go to Twitter and you see that the page is blocked, but then you can open Safari or Internet Explorer, God forbid, and access that site instead. But, so Freedom is the one that I personally use and love. And it also works for the iPhone and iOS and Android. Rescue Time is another great example of one that it gives you awareness into how you spend your time, but also allows you to block distractions in the paid version of the app. Cold Turkey is another good example, written by another fine Canadian chap like myself. He lives a few hours away from where I live here in Canada. And there's also an app called Cold Turkey Writer, where if you do any writing, if you're writing a report or something, you enable Cold Turkey Writer, and the app takes over your computer, so you got to restart it if you want to do anything else. But it doesn't shut off. It doesn't allow you to access other websites until you've either written a certain number of words or written for a certain amount of time, and you can specify which limit you'd like and prefer. And so these are all ways where we can get in front of our attention and disable distractions. Because, I kind of break it down, and I hate like 4-step, 10-step systems and bullshit like that, because I think, a lot of experts who say, oh, these are the 10 steps of focus, are just bullshitting you, and they're just trying to like make more money whenever they do consulting or a talk. But I found that we can look at the research on our focus and our attention and see that the patterns that are that correspond with our attention are very rhythmic. We focus on something, our attention gets distracted either by something internal or external, then we bring it back. And I think it's quite possible, and I cover this in the book, obviously, to model some steps by which we can focus deeper on our most important tasks each day. So, first of all, choosing something productive or meaningful to focus on, whether it's a conversation with a loved one, whether it's a report that we want to be writing. After we choose what to focus, very few of us choose what we do before we do it. And so just doing this gives us a leg up. But second, after that point, is eliminating as many external and internal distractions as you possibly can. External ones with a distractions blocker, by putting on noise canceling headphones, by creating a distraction free mode by which we can work. So choose something to do, eliminate the distractions, focus on that thing, and then be kind to our mind. This is the fourth step, while we continually draw our attention back to it. And so we can follow the rhythms of our attention. And because we choose what we do, we can become more productive, because we choose the productive things on which we direct our attention. Because we eliminate more distractions, the thing that we truly want to be accomplishing becomes the most pleasurable or threatening or novel thing on our plate. Mm-hmm. Because we focus on that thing with our complete attention, we've kind of done the work in advance. And because we be kind to our mind as we draw our attention back to it, we notice that we're distracted more often. And then we can get back on track to what's important. So, it's very simple, but I think, if we fall, I'm not even answering the original question you asked. I was just been kind of riffing on it. But
no,
I think following these steps, we can really get so much more done. And not only that, but like live a more meaningful life too, because we choose to focus on conversations. We choose to focus on, letting our mind wander when somebody's gone to the bathroom, when we're at the restaurant with them. Like, this is how, like, the state of our attention, if there's one thing I found in the research, it's that the state of our attention determines the state of our life. If by moment we feel distracted, we're going to live a distracted life, because these moments accumulate to create a life. But it's by becoming thoughtful about managing our attention that we become more productive, we become more creative, but we also experience more meaning and notice that meaning by creating it in the first place.
Yeah, I'm really glad you went down that path and you walked us through that. And within the area of deciding what you're going to focus on, have you found that creating to-do lists or having kind of an agenda for your day helps you stay focused on that one thing that is in front of you at that time, so that your mind's not wandering to the other plate or the other things that are on your plate that you need to do?
Yeah, something that we can all do as we focus on something. So you choose something to focus on, you eliminate the distractions, is to keep a distractions list. So internal ideas in your mind are going to come up. Things you've remember that you've forgotten to do are going to rise to the surface of your attention, and getting them out of your mind and into your external environment as kind of a cue that you can act upon later is a powerful thing to do that allows you to refocus on whatever you really intend to be doing. And I think the power of a to-do list, it's good for kind of seeing what's on your plate, but it's even better for allowing you to focus on what's important, because you know that all the things that you could potentially be doing are captured somewhere. And so that portion of your mind can stop thinking about them and become more wholly immersed in what you're experiencing and what you intend to accomplish. But one of my favorite intention setting rituals is, and I keep this on top of the task list that I maintain each day, is to set just a few intentions every day. I call this the rule of 3. And so at the start of the day, you fast forward to the end of the day in your mind and you think, okay, what 3 things will I want to have accomplished by the time that this day is over? You can only choose 3, so you really have to prioritize what's important and what's meaningful. I like to choose 3 personal intentions each day also. Usually it's the relationships in my life or hitting the gym, something along those lines. And so the idea is that by the time the day is done, this forces you to prioritize, and we can usually remember 3 things because this is a number, this is the approximate limit of how many things we can hold in our attention at one time. And the world is structured around this idea. We have sayings like good things come in 3s, and celebrities die in 3s, and the 3rd time's the charm, and the good, the bad, the ugly, and blood, sweat, and tears. And we award 3 Olympic medals. We divide a story into 3 parts, the beginning, the middle, and the end. And the list goes on. The 3 little bears, the 3 blind mice, the 3 little pigs, the 3 musketeers. The list goes on. I had a lot of coffee this morning. I haven't had 3 coffees, but I've had one very strong one, which is probably the equivalent of 3. But the idea is that, a to-do list allows us to capture what's on our plate so we can focus on what's truly important, while these intentions give us something to choose to focus on when we follow those steps of managing our attention.
So, Chris, I know that people, having gotten a taste of what your work is all about, are going to want to learn more. So you've got this new book, Hyperfocus, coming out later here in August. Where can people go to check out the book, learn more about you, and find out more about your work?
Yeah, in August, the exciting thing about writing a book is that I've discovered is that we're out in like 7 or 8 languages in August. And so wherever you are in the world, walk to your local bookstore or hop on over to your local Amazon shop. And the book is available, as I say, wherever books are sold. My website is called A Life of Productivity. It's where I talk about my weird experiments and the advice that often I discover the hard way, but often, just talking about the research and geeking out about stuff like that. Yeah. What am I missing? I always suck at plugging my stuff. But yeah, the book is called Hyperfocus, How to Be More Productive in the World of Distraction. My first book is called The Productivity Project, Accomplishing More by Managing Your Time, Attention, and Energy, which are, I think, the 3 ingredients of productivity. And it's just a pleasure to be here.
Love it. Well, I think that anybody who has listened to this episode is going to be able to implement some of these strategies the minute that they stop listening to it. So I appreciate you sharing so many actionable tools, resources, and strategies for people to be more productive. And as you do more research and continue to go down this path, we're going to have to do a round 2 to catch people up on the other strategies that I'm sure we didn't even touch on today. So Chris, thank you so much for taking the time.
Hours, man. Yeah, thank you so much for having. I really appreciate it.